Thank you, Mrs. Arnold. Okay, let's introduce ourselves briefly. First of all, members of our Board of Trustees or past members of our Board of Trustees, could you please raise your hands? Mrs. Swan, raise them high so we can see. Okay, administration, please raise your hands. Good. Returning teachers, you've been here at least last year. Go ahead and raise your hands. New teachers, you were just hired. Okay, take a look there. Parents who have been at Foundations training before and are coming back for more. The good and the faithful, the dedicated and the committed, wonderful. Parents newly admitted to the school or applicants to the school who haven't been admitted yet but are hoping to be, raise your hands. Welcome. Okay, have I missed anyone? I think that probably covers most. Students. Hi, Joseph. Thanks for coming. We've got a couple students that will be presenting throughout the day. You've got a green piece of paper there that has bios of those who will be involved. Jane and Nanette, I'm sorry I forgot to ask you for yours. We'll get that for tomorrow. Thank you for coming. The American Heritage School Foundations Training. It's something, as I alluded to earlier, that we do every year. And it doesn't change that much from year to year because the principles that are at the foundation of our school's curriculum and methodologies don't change. The school has evolved and improved and grown, over the course of 40 years, longer than that, depending on how you view the history of this school. But the principles are timeless. And so this training is different from our August orientation and policy and curriculum training where we focus primarily on principles and foundational methodologies that run through all of our teaching and policies like a silver white line. That's something you'll learn more about in our patriotic program. And for some of us, year after year, and this will be my 8th year at the school this coming year, for some of us, every now and then we might have this reaction that, oh no, here we go again. But the way the Lord views that, when speaking of correct principles, is not, oh no, here we go again, but as Elder Maxwell taught, one eternal round. One eternal round, one eternally beautiful round. This training transformed my home. It transformed my view of myself as a parent, as a teacher, and it changed my life. And I remember well the first time that I sat in a chair right there. That's the chair I sat in the first time I was at this training. And I felt like I just could not get enough. I hope that you have that experience today with at least one principle that will transform your home life, your teaching, your parenthood. And that's my prayer and hope for you today. Now, introduction of our first two presenters. Janet, are you going to go before Stan? You are. Okay. Dr. Janet Erickson served as an assistant professor in the School of Family Life at Brigham Young University, where she taught classes on everyday family life and parenting until 2010, when her first child was born. She completed a PhD at the University of Minnesota, where she worked with Dr. Bill Doherty on cultural conversations around issues of parenting in an overscheduled, hyper-techno, supersizing culture. Have you ever experienced that? In January 2007, she was invited on the Today Show to discuss the issue of out-of-control birthday parties and their effects on parents and children. Prior to her PhD work, she taught for the Linguistics Department at Brigham Young University. The first board member of American Heritage, who is also an AHS alumna, Dr. Jacob was nurtured in a love for America and education grounded in the Scriptures and the restored gospel. She is the fifth of 11 children, a daughter of James and LaDawn Jacob, and a granddaughter of H. Verlin and Shirley Anderson. She and her husband Michael live in Salt Lake City with their daughter LaDawn. And I will also introduce Stan, who I think will come up just after Janet. Should we go ahead and do that now, Stan? We're going to have kind of a team presentation here. So, Stanford Swim is the president of the GFC Foundation, a Utah-based private foundation that has been a major supporter of American Heritage School for nearly 2 decades. Prior to his current post, he was a senior analyst for Probity Advisors, a registered investment advisor in Dallas, Texas. Stan also worked as a software engineer and database developer. He serves as a trustee of the Sutherland Institute, the State Policy Network, and recently completed a term as chairman of the National Center for Adoption. I think you just finished that term, is that right, Stan? Mr. Swim received an MBA from Southern Methodist University and a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science from Utah Valley State, from UVU, UVSC at the time. An accomplished pianist and composer, Stan is a frequent guest performer and lecturer on the topic of music and its impact on individuals and families. And without further ado, we give you Dr. Janet Erickson and Stanford Swim.
Thank you, Grant, so much. It's such a privilege to be here, and welcome to those of you who are new to the school. And a special thanks to all of you who give so much to your children, who have children already here, and then those teachers who dedicate their lives from morning to night to serve those children. It's a privilege to be in your presence. I was up late with our daughter who didn't want to sleep, and I was thinking about all the parents who would be coming today who've been through that many hundreds of thousands of times more than I have. And it deepens my gratitude for what you do as mothers and fathers and teachers. Stan and I have a precious privilege today. We grew up near each other and are the same. We're in the same grade, right close to the same age, but didn't ever know we would be in this particular position together. And it's an honor to be able to share the history of this school, which we haven't always included at Foundations training, but have felt that it was important to do so that you would be renewed, if you have been familiar at all with the history of the school, or if it is new to you, that you would develop a sense of your place in history, in the history of this place. My grandfather, Berlin Anderson, was the founder of this school in 1970. But prior to that time, I'm just going to take us back a little while to that very first commission by Brigham Young to Carl Mazur, the great educator, who was a rather harsh man at the time, a harsh teacher known for his harshness, and also his astuteness and ability, but brought into the office of President Brigham Young and told that he needed to help build education in Zion. And given the mandate that you're so familiar with, Brother Mazur, this was all the instruction he received from Brigham Young at that time. Brother Mazur, I want you to remember that you ought not to teach even the alphabet or the multiplication tables without the Spirit of God. Brother Reynolds, who was the secretary of Brigham Young at that time, talked about the transformation that happened to Brother Mazur as he heard that mandate and gave his life to living it out. And of course, there was much sacrifice involved in that effort to found Brigham Young Academy. And it grew, and miracles happened. Providence watched over its founding. And then in 1968, after years of this growth and struggle and growth some more, President Wilkinson, the then president of BYU, said that they were going to close the BYU elementary program and the BYU high school, BY Academy, BYU Elementary and BY High School. And the group of parents who were involved in having their children educated there were concerned. As you might feel about education today, they were anxious about having a place where their children could be nurtured in light and truth. And so my grandfather gathered a group of people around him. He was a professor at BYU at the time, and other professors were working with him. And they gathered with this desire, the way he described it. They desired to have their children's academic learning grounded in principles that would help them develop faith in God and a love of liberty and patriotism. In order to do this, they knew the scriptures needed to be part of the learning of their children.
because through the scriptures, the Holy Ghost would be present to teach them the truth. And so in 1970, with a small group of students, the school was opened. Of course, they started the school with an interesting name, American Heritage, as a reminder of what we inherit in the heritage of Americans that belongs not only to us, but belongs to the entire world of God's children. We'll talk some more about what that American heritage means in a subsequent part of this training. It was hard. My grandparents didn't have a lot of money. No one did. They were looking for a building. He was a close friend of President Benson. He called President Benson, and President Benson said, there is a building after some time, and it was an old building, an old church. He said, if you want it, you better step on it and get it quick because people are interested in it. So they made a down payment of $1,000, which was a big sacrifice for them at that time. And they opened the school. They didn't have books. My grandmother got a call from her sister who taught in the Phoenix School District for decades. And she said, I just got word that there are a whole bunch of books, old books, that are being dumped in a landfill. You can come and get them if you'd like to. They got a truck from a neighbor with a big storage area in it and headed down to Phoenix as soon as they could and loaded up those books before they were tossed into the landfill, trying to sort out what would be appropriate. And then they brought them back to their students and tried to use the best that they could from what was there. In 1972, Grandpa asked KAC and Geneva Cornell in particular to write a program that's become part of the legacy of American Heritage School, The Spirit of America Speaks, about the history of liberty from the beginning of time as we know it through now. And it became a very beloved part of our growing up and participation at the school. One sweet miracle happened with that. The first performance, and Mrs. Green had been invited, not acquainted with the school. That was her first experience. After the program, she walked up to my grandfather and she said, what can I do to help support the school? This is a marvelous effort. She was impressed by what she saw. And he kind of jokingly told her that they had a mortgage of a particular amount. The next week, they received an anonymous check from someone. She didn't write her name on it. We'll assume that it was her, covering the cost of that mortgage. And the building was then theirs. But I grew up in that old building that people would go by and think, who in the world would ever want to go into that building?
Where sacred and precious things happened because of consecrated efforts. I knew, as did all of my 10 brothers and sisters, that many of those teachers walked home with very little. They made the commitment when they first came to the school and opened it that they would take home what was extra, what was surplus. And as you can imagine, sometimes there was not surplus for them. And so periodically throughout the year, we'd be asked as families to come and help clean the building, clean up the grounds, help build the playground where the children would play, where we'd all participate. We knew it was a consecrated effort. And all of you who come to the school learn that beautiful pattern of sacrifice out of love for what is so remarkable about a place where children can grow in light and truth. And that's what we see over and over again, year after year, so much of a consecrated effort. There were other miracles. One of the precious miracles was the writing of the song, the school song. I'm going to read the words to you. You'll become familiar with it as you're here with the school. But it captures the vision that those first founders had of what would be possible for the children in this school. Children of liberty, learn from the past. Truth, honor, charity, this is our task. Our fathers gave to us this land unwalled, to grow and joy therein and serve our God. Children of liberty, now visions come. Live your life carefully, obey the Son. Be to your brothers a measure that's true. Give to them willingly God's love to you. Children of liberty, daylight is low. Darkness and storm converge. Let your ray glow. Present and past are yours to live anew. Prepare for Christ to come in all that you do. And the school continued. In 1999, I had the opportunity to go with a remarkable group of women. There were 7 of us, I believe. Laurie was in the group, and Eugene Livingston, who's passed away, but who was a great, valiant pioneer in helping families who are homeschooling have access to beautiful materials. And we went to this place called Stonebridge, a school in Chesapeake, Virginia, because we'd gotten wind that they were doing something remarkable there. And we sat in that training and were taught a particular methodology that we had not yet had at the school, a methodology that allowed us to know how the scriptures could become the foundation of all subjects, and a methodology that allowed the Christian truths and character that we wanted children to develop to have the proper way for that to happen. It was very interesting because I, of course, had graduated from the school, and all of my brothers and sisters had at that time. And I was sitting beside my mom, and she would say to me throughout those trainings, that 3-day period, she would lean over and say, "This is what Grandpa wanted. This is what he had in mind. He wanted," though the school had tried, right, to do that valiantly and had, he had wanted a particular method to help us to know how to ground children in the truths of the scriptures and academic learning. And so we came back, and I'll turn the time over to Stan because the story continues in a beautiful way that leads to the past and then to the future.
Good morning. It's a privilege to be here with each of you. I approach these next few minutes somewhat cautiously. There's only time for part of this story, and I've only told it once before, and that was in a room full of high school students here at the school who had chosen to ask some questions that led us to talk a little bit about it. Stories talk about people, but the people in this story wouldn't want to be the focus of it. So what I hope will happen today is 3 things. First of all, that I can convey a little broader perspective on what I believe is a restoration in education. Second, a greater understanding of the work and sacrifice that built this particular institution. And third, and I think this may be the most important, perhaps providing some spark that will help you find a means of writing your own chapter in that story. Janet just finished introducing briefly how we came to have the Foundation for American Christian Education. I'm being told to put the mic up. Is that better? Okay. Excuse me. Janet just finished telling how we came to have the Foundation for American Christian Education methodology here at the school. I'm going to pick up where she left off and do a little bit of a zigzag, but we're going to step out of Utah, out of the church, and into a different family. My mother's side of our family, the Bankheads, came here as Mormon pioneers in the mid-1800s. But the first Mormon pioneer on the swim side of our family was my dad himself. He grew up in a Christian tradition, and to make many long stories into a short one, Dad left his home state of California after seeing the disastrous 1960s from a front row seat. In Utah and BYU, he found a value system that built on his own, and he was baptized in August of 1968. If you know the history of that particular year, you can imagine how everlastingly important it was to my dad to find the anchor in the restored gospel in that year of all years. 2 men on the faculty at BYU were particularly influential in Dad's thinking. A Book of Mormon professor named Reed Bankhead and a business law professor named H. Verlin Anderson. Dad finished his bachelor's degree in business, then served a mission in Germany, and after that he courted and married Laurie Bankhead, my mother, and completed a master's degree in political science. Upon completing his master's, Dad was hired as vice president of Cleon Skousen's Freeman Institute, now National Center for Constitutional Studies, and then left later to start his own business career. By the time he and Laurie had the first 3 of their 5 children, all these things that I've just described happened in less than 10 years. Dad absorbed all of this, not because he was a genius, but because his family upbringing and heritage had prepared him for it, although in some rather curious ways. Dad's great-grandfather, Henry Jackson Swim, was a member of the early faculty of the University of Washington. And you'll like this, given this building. He was a Christian communist. I don't know if you've heard anything about those, but there were a lot of them in the mid-1800s, and my great-great-grandfather was one of them. Every account we have of Henry, including his own writing, reveals him to be a deeply believing and principled person. He was a committed teacher and an emphatic political participant. Imagine if his obituary were written of you, and I'm going to quote his obituary. Death closed the career of Professor H.J. Swim of Linden, Washington on Saturday, November 7th, and his remains were laid to rest on the 9th. The deceased was a gentleman of fine education and possessed many lovable qualities. These will be remembered by a large circle of acquaintances, however much they disagreed with his political trend. Here we go. Always sincere and always an extremist, he drew from life very little of contentment and mental repose. He was too impulsive for leadership and too exacting for compromises, and therefore his social position never gained much strength. It gets better. He was a man too full of oil and too slim of wick to make a flaming beacon. His being carried on a stretcher to the polling booth 3 days before his death was pathetic evidence of devotion to his convictions. Now, that was the election where William Jennings Bryan was running against the cross of gold. If you remember that, Henry did not like the gold standard. Never our friend, nor yet our enemy, hail and farewell. Funny as it is, there are some important lessons to draw from that obituary and from Henry's life, and these are lessons our family has tried to learn over the years and apply. First, one can seek to be principled, scriptural. Henry's doctoral thesis was communism as taught by Christ in the Gospels, okay? One can be principled, seek to be principled, scriptural, and sincere, and still, at least from our point of view, be mistaken. Second, love, principles, and sincerity are ingredients for leadership, but they're not the whole recipe. Third, humility should temper our private convictions and our public service. We'll come back to Henry and these lessons in a few minutes. Henry's son, Arthur, started off as a teacher in Anacortes, Washington, but eventually became a banker in Washington and an early developer of Twin Falls, Idaho. Arthur's son, Dudley, graduated from Stanford University in 1928 and went to New York, becoming an exceptional investor and businessman. Despite starting his Wall Street career 1 year before the breakout of the Great Depression, Dudley earned enough to retire 9 years later at the age of 32. After service as a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy during World War II, he moved to Carmel, California, where he managed his own investments and resumed work that he'd started at the outbreak of the war on some charitable concerns. Dudley believed wholeheartedly and emphatically in the American system, and he was appalled by what progressivism and the New Deal had done to it. He early determined to challenge both of those things at the level of ideas and to restore the values and institutions that had been thus corrupted. This he did through writing, extensive speaking. He was National Vice Commander of the American Legion and had occasion to speak all over the country, and increasingly focused and strategic charitable donation. It turns out that many others had the same concerns at the same time. Dudley and his wife Kay worked with many people and organizations over the 2 decades following World War II, including Claremont College, Stanford University, Hillsdale College, Rockford College, which is in a roundabout way the parent institution of the World Congress of Families, the Foundation for Economic Education, and the American Enterprise Institute, which was the first great conservative think tank. But the 1960s made it clear that talking to college students wasn't enough. Elementary education became a concern, and it was at this time that Kay formed a special friendship with Verna Hall, the founder of the Foundation for American Christian Education, who lived just a couple of hours north in nearby San Francisco. Dudley and Kay supported FACE's effort to acquire additional source material and produce some of the red books. The famous big FACE books, if you've ever seen them, you can't carry them with your scriptures. They're big. Anyway, they're the same form factor as a dictionary, and with good reason. Dudley, these books were on my dad's bookshelf as I grew up, and when I was in homeschool in 8th grade in the mid-'80s, those were the books that he used to guide some of my teaching. That was incidentally at the same time that Janet and I were in the same ward, living about, well, you could see her back window from my back window. They were about 100 yards apart, I think. And we were fortunate to be in the ward with the Jacobs and the Andersons. It was a wonderful time. Mom and Dad eventually enrolled my 2 youngest sisters at American Heritage, and Dad was invited to join the Board of Trustees in 1993 and elected as chairman the following year. 2 years later, he described the situation of the school at that point. He said, quote, "The school was being run by exceptionally dedicated people," and you've heard from Janet what form that dedication took. It is remarkable. "But lacked sound business and organizational practices beginning at the board level and extending on down." I suppose that's natural if you're just trying to stay alive. The school was a corporation, but no one could find the bylaws. There was a general sense of philosophy and principles, but no clear mission statement to unite the board, faculty, and parents. Tuition was modest and insufficient to cover the costs of maintaining an old building and other capital expenses, yet most parents thought they were paying their way. Close quote. Now, the fact that Dad found a school without a clear mission at that moment in time, it didn't have to be that way, because not too long after that, he did find a clear statement of philosophy from Elder Anderson, beautifully written, and he used that statement of philosophy to craft the school's present mission statement. If you have not had a chance to read that, I hope you will not let today close without doing so. It guides everything, I hope, that happens in this building. So, Dad, with the help of some wonderful trustees and staff, was able to get the school retooled operationally and begin to get things on a firmer footing. And when teachers in 1999 came upon material from the Foundation for American Christian Education, Dad was waiting to help them implement it. And I'll let Laurie Hupdike tell you that story if she ever wants to. She was a little mad at him for holding out. So what do we take from this history? And I want to spend these last few minutes on what I think are some therefore whats. First, this truly is a mission-driven school, not a market-driven one. In one sentence, our mission, as best we're able to carry it out, is to play a scholastic role in Christ's plan for children and families. How we understand and fill that role does change, and I hope improve, through experience and prayerful consideration. Whereas earlier curriculum here, the Abeka curriculum, for example, was essentially secular with a spiritual overlay, the spiritual mission has always been at the core here. It was a question of learning over time what materials and how best to teach that. FACE methods and curriculum were adopted because they are Christian from the bottom up. But even FACE methods and principles improve when you add the restored gospel, and you will see, I think, as well as anyone can teach it, as Janet launches into this later, how that works and how those fit together. As another example, for many years, students here did not wear a uniform. Today's uniform is an effort to teach promise-keeping, it is a tool for increasing unity, and it is a tutor in modesty and respect. Second takeaway, while singular sacrifices, profound ones, but singular, ennobled our beginning, as Janet has beautifully recounted, a broader sacrifice has been and will be necessary to perpetuate what happens here. Consider that the current campus and school operations have needed around $30 million over the last 15 years from the efforts of my father and grandfather in order to be where they are, plus very substantial time commitments. It's taken a lot of people's time. At the same time, families have been asked to pay substantially greater tuition, yet that tuition still only covers the operating costs of the child being here. If there was debt on this building, in a way that is typical of most of our peer schools, tuition would double overnight. It still takes, and probably always will, a measure of professional sacrifice to work or teach here. But the sacrifice has been spread to the whole community, and I think that is important and for the best. The third takeaway needs a little more explanation than the first two, and it concerns our understanding of self-government and human nature. And this is the start of something that's going to be not just an eternal round, but around all day today. Okay? There is an infant, and I believe providential restoration afoot in education that's been going on for at least 3 generations, about 80 years. In this country, it can be seen as one response to the failures caused by the flowering of trends from the Enlightenment, humanism, to progressivism, to socialism. One could argue that the toehold, that these trends found an American toehold in the never-ending argument over man's true nature and how to build a nation consistent with that nature. This argument the founding addressed, but never extinguished. History shows that it was not Jefferson and not Hamilton, but Adams and Madison who understood man's true nature best, and no one can doubt that Washington exemplified man's nature at its best. But the presence of these 3 irreplaceable men in the Continental Choir did not make the whole ensemble sing in unison with them. Never in American history has the question of man's nature been treated as a truly settled question. But I believe the blessings of freedom we've enjoyed have been possible because in the moment, and it was only a moment, when our Constitution was conceived, the Christian truths of man's divine heritage and his fallen nature were the dominant melody around which the rest of the American symphony was composed. When someone today complains or taunts that our founding documents do not comprehend the complexities of modern technological societies, they're right, but they're also badly missing the point. Our founding documents do not narrowly address the qualities of any particular society. They precisely address the essential and enduring traits of people. That's the evidence of their inspiration, the source of their strength, and the taproot of their timelessness. Living our mission at this school for 40 years, we have trended away from emphasizing governments made by men, although we should still study them, to emphasizing the government within each man and each woman. That is what we mean by self-government, which you'll notice is over one of the arches here. We don't mean it in sort of a get-off-my-back government sense. We mean it as in broken heart and contrite spirit, turn your soul to the Lord sense. This is why the restored gospel of Christ must be central in our teaching. It reconciles man's divine heritage and fallen nature through the atonement of Jesus Christ. People who govern themselves by Christ's law are at once the most governable and the most naturally free people anywhere. Educating hearts and minds, our school tagline, is a phrase easily turned into a cliche, but here it means something very profound and significant. We mean by it the specific task of helping children build their characters on the rock of Christ while preparing their minds to carry out whatever mission they may have in the Lord's plan. Remember Henry Jackson's swim, Mr. Too Full of Oil and Too Slim of Wick? I believe his influence was constrained because he thought too much about governments made by men and not enough about the governments within each man. That may have misordered his principles, and it certainly limited his usefulness. Most insidiously, focusing on civil government more than Christian self-government leads straight to pride. We have all seen examples of this and might even find some in our own conduct. The shared vision of Verlin Anderson and Gaylord Swim, both of whom wrote politically, but ultimately focused more and more on the heart, should lead us down a path of true education as students and families, simply because their shared vision was little more than an invitation to find Christ in every aspect of our learning. It seems right to me to conclude on this note, this discussion of a providential restoration in education. The restoration of the gospel began with a single revelatory event, but most restorations in history don't work that way. They follow a line-upon-line pattern where the Spirit stirs people from diverse places and creeds to start work on the same problems. The Reformation and the King James Bible came about this way, and I believe future observers may see today's work on Christian education as a similar narrative. American Heritage School may be one small chapter in that narrative. I hope that it will be, and I hope that each of us will commit to being a part of that story. Thank you.